So oftentimes at the beginning of a venture, whether it's pre-launch or after launch, people aren't very good at telling you, giving you that feedback. And by collecting user data, what are they actually doing? Oftentimes you pivot to what they actually want, which is not what they were saying. In this episode, we delve into the concept of pivoting in business, a strategic maneuver that involves significant shifts in a company's direction or business model in response to market feedback or new opportunities. Explore how this crucial strategy can redefine an organization's path to success, offering valuable lessons on adaptability and resilience for every entrepreneur.
The Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast is your ultimate launchpad for igniting ideas and skyrocketing your entrepreneurial dreams. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing brilliantly as always. What about you, Professor Palin?
Keeping busy as always. Same deal.
Love it.
Ryan, today I wanted to talk about a concept that both you and I are big fans of, and we've implemented probably every time we've ever started a business. It's referred to as pivoting, which is basically a strategic shift in a company's direction, product, or business model.
Absolutely. And honestly, in modern day ventures, if you're not pivoting to some degree, you're just calling it something different. There's no way that you're not making adjustments.
What typically happens is you start off with a basic concept in mind. You have a basic target market in mind and a direction. And as you get closer to the market, you either realize that you made some errors, misunderstandings, misjudgments, or you might get closer to the market and look to the right and see something that's more lucrative. And you say, oh, let's pivot in that direction. But when you started, you'd have no way of knowing this.
I forget who told me this analogy, so if I'm not giving you credit because you told it to me, I apologize ahead of time.
Before you say it, I'm going to take credit for it. It was me.
There we go. It probably was, though, is the reality. Whoever told it to me, I think about this every time. And essentially, if you got to a place and you could see a mountain in the distance and you knew you were trying to get to the top of the mountain and you started climbing, most likely you're going to get to a point, look around. Okay, my next best path is there. You're going to get to that point, look around. Okay, my next best path is there. And it's going to be broken up into a bunch of these micro paths that get you ultimately to the top. And I've always thought about that as pivoting. You know, we set these procedures in place to get to the top, the goal. Oftentimes, every step you get a set of new information, you get a better look at it, you get a better perspective of it, you get more clients that are giving you feedback, and that's what causes those shifts.
And there's different reasons that you pivot. Market demand changes can cause a pivot. So not even did you not see what was there, but as you're moving forward, there's a shift in the market. You have to be agile enough to change direction. Technology advancements can be reasons for pivoting. Even internal business challenges. It doesn't even have to be an external market issue. It could be something happening within your company that could be an outflow of a particular talent. There could be an inflow or an opportunity to align with a particular talent that causes the opportunity to arise to shift.
I'll throw another one in there, and it's that people aren't often good at articulating what they want. So oftentimes at the beginning of a venture, whether it's pre-launch or after launch, people aren't very good at telling you, giving you that feedback. And by collecting user data, what are they actually doing? Oftentimes you pivot to what they actually want, which is not what they were saying.
That's 100% correct. And that's all the reason is we keep banging this home is continually be in touch with the customers, get feedback from the customers, speak with the customers, and listen with an open mind. Because if you don't, you'll miss pivoting opportunities. The process that I look at pivoting, I break it down into 4 parts. One is you identify the need for a pivot, and you want to understand how it's necessary and also gauge the urgency of that pivot.
That's a big one. Does it need to happen next week, or can we shift over time?
And then the second aspect of the process, it's a no kidding type of statement. You plan the pivot. And that's very similar to when you're starting the business. You have to do additional market research, financial forecast, risk assessment, et cetera.
It's exactly the same as starting a business because you are shifting one of the facets of that business, hopefully quite dramatically.
Again, similar to the startup, you're executing the pivot, which we always acknowledge that execution is the hardest part of entrepreneurship. But you're focusing on strategies to ensure smooth operation, strategic transitions.
That strategic transition I like to think about is preventing whiplash. You want your clients to understand and not think that this is a competitor company or competitor product. You want to take them along on that pivot with you.
Now, the last of the four for the process of pivoting, and it's not necessarily the last sequentially, but I purposely left it for last. This is the one people make the mistake of. It's communication, or the mistake of lack of communication. It's very important to communicate changes to your stakeholders, to your employees, to your customers, etc.
I spoke too soon on the whiplash comment. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Making sure everybody then externally and internally is on board with the new pivot.
Once you have a process in place, you've identified a pivot and you committed to the pivot, there's some challenges and benefits. On the challenge side, you have to look at the resource allocation. So do you have the resources necessary for that pivot? Also, you have to look at, can I maintain my company identity or do I have to rebrand it?
How big is that pivot? Is it going to necessitate an entire rebrand, rename, or can it just be something you have underneath you? That's a good one to note. What's the scale of it?
Yeah, think of that restaurant that started off as, I believe it was Boston Chicken, and they pivoted to Boston Market.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and for obvious reasons, when they expanded their product line, they're locked into the chicken concept. And so there's a rebranding component going on. Also, too, you have to look at, is it a market reentry to a totally different segment? Or are you still within the segment of the original concept, or are you going in a totally different direction? That's a challenge.
It is. It is definitely a challenge. And those are really hard decisions to make because it can feel like you're starting over.
The benefits of a successful pivot is obviously you're increasing or ideally increasing your market relevance, you're enhancing your growth prospects, and ideally you have a stronger competitive advantage.
Right. You're aligning yourself more with customer needs.
Anyone listening, they'll say, well, should we pivot? What are the consequences of this? So I came up with a couple examples of some very well-known companies that pivoted drastically. Now, the first, I believe you used the product is Slack. Do you know what their pivot was originally?
Oh, goodness. I probably should. I'm a big fan of Slack, but I don't.
They started off as a gaming company called Tiny Speck, and they developed a game called Glitch.
I've never heard that. That's incredible.
Exactly. Glitch failed to gain market traction. But what happened is the team had developed an internal communication tool that they built to coordinate their own work. And they looked at that and they said, wow, this tool is working really well. And they pivoted, developed that tool to what we know as Slack today.
Incredible. And now everyone wants to take down Slack.
Now, Twitter is another one. Did you know Twitter had a major pivot? It's actually referred to as X now. They began as a company called Audio. They were a network where people could find and subscribe to podcasts. That was their original concept as Audio.
Yeah, amazing.
But then Apple launched iTunes podcasting, and that pushed them out of the market. They brainstormed a new direction, and henceforth the creation of Twitter.
Incredible.
So those are two very well-known companies that had drastic pivots that worked out very well for them. So I thought a couple of examples would actually give incentive to companies looking and saying, should we pivot if they have a concern about pivoting? There are some success stories to that.
Ryan, before we continue, I'd like to address an important issue for the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast. Creating a quality podcast with valuable content is very time-consuming and has substantial costs to create and produce. To cover these costs, many podcasts use a paid subscription model. Others use a sponsorship model. We prefer not to implement either of these options. I would like to address a concept called value for value podcasting.
While we enjoy creating value for our listeners, providing insights that enhance their entrepreneurial success, it would mean the world to us if our audience would also give some value back to us to support our efforts.
One might wonder, how can you support our show? Well, it's simple. Sharing our podcast with friends, colleagues, or on your social media is a fantastic way to give back.
Also, we love receiving your feedback, comments, or even just a cheerful email.
Or consider making a monetary contribution through platforms such as Venmo or Substack.
You can also support us by setting up a bill payment through your bank. This method allows you to send a contribution directly to our physical address.
Every bit of support counts, whether it's tuning in, sharing our episodes, or contributing financially. Each contribution helps us cover production costs and improve the podcast.
Check out our website at prospirit.com, where you can find more details on how to support us. Every contribution, no matter the size, makes a massive difference. Decide for yourself, what is the value of this episode to you? Let's do this together. We provide value and you return value. Value for value podcasting.
Thank you for being a part of Let's Get Entrepreneurial. Now, let's get back to today's episode.
I'll throw another quick one on there. Most of us use it daily. It would be Netflix. They went from the CD rental model to now the streaming giant. They saw technology was changing, customer demands were changing, and they picked correctly.
They pivoted drastically. And I remember when that was happening, a lot of people in the marketplace thought that they were making a big misstep.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can remember thinking, everybody has cable. Why would you pay another fee to get this? And now I don't know what percentage of the market has cable, but I know in my generation, a lot of people don't have cable. They just have a collection of these streaming services.
That's another rule of thumb generally, not just with pivoting, but with ideas I have for starting businesses. If enough people tell me I'm crazy, I think I might be onto something.
There's a fine line there. You're still crazy though. Don't worry.
It's called eccentric. When I'm in academia, that's called eccentric. And the beauty of academia is you can be eccentric and no one even notices.
Yeah, right. You fit in.
Well, before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts on the concept of pivoting, Ryan?
Yes. I'd just say to take it seriously. A lot of times people get very stubborn when they're talking about their baby, their business, the thing they've put all this time and effort into, and make sure that you're still looking for the warning signs so you can shift early enough. There are as many fun examples as we can give of companies that have successfully pivoted. There are dozens and dozens that have refused to see the signs written on the wall, even to the last minute, and haven't pivoted. They chose to stay with their stable product or service, and it has ultimately been the downfall of the company.
I agree 100%. And basically what your suggestion is, keep your head up and keep looking.
That's exactly right.
Before we conclude, I'd just like to ask our listeners, if you haven't subscribed to our podcast yet, please do so. You have access to further and deeper insights into entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. Please subscribe. That's what keeps us alive. It keeps us doing this.
Definitely. Well, let's get entrepreneurial.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
We extend our gratitude for your presence and attention. Check out profspirit.com to discover resources and courses designed specifically for innovators like you. Stay on the cutting edge by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and other platforms as it is released. Until then, keep the entrepreneurial flame burning.